All right, here we go. Welcome into the Stone Shield Show. We are here. We are live. It is Tuesday, February 10th. Appreciate everybody making us a part of your day. Bear with us here as we continue to maneuver through a bit of an unorthodox schedule. The plan was to go like 3 o'clock today. Things changed. We're back just 30 minutes after when we would typically start here at 11:30. Yesterday, we were at 3. Tomorrow is up in the air. Have some pre-recorded stuff there as well. But once opening day is here, really before that, probably in a week or two, we will be back to our normally scheduled programming here, 11 o'clock with my show. And good news, we're going to get Reed Mouse back on either later this week or early next week. Guest appearance, not the full off the bench, but he will be on my show for a segment. So looking forward to that conversation with Reed Mouse. But appreciate everyone being here. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't done so already. YouTube.com/CBoxSports. Also, make sure you give us a follow on our social media. We've really done a nice job of growing that over the course of the past few weeks, months, and years, really. So big shout-out to our social media team, all the interns putting in great work, as well as Nick Kirby, Craig Sandlin, and others helping us out with that. But make sure you give us a follow. Give me a follow as well, at StoneShields_ on Twitter, at The Stone Shields on Twitter. Follow the show there as well as we continue to build those platforms. But lots of stuff I want to discuss today. Mark Sheldon, MLB.com, friend of the show, he put out his first Cincinnati Reds opening day projection. Pitchers and catchers reported, of course, yesterday to Goodyear, Arizona. This is his first projection. Things will change, right? Maybe there's an acquisition or two for Cincinnati over the course of the next few weeks. Somebody inevitably probably going to get dinged up and not be available to go on opening day. It's just kind of the reality of the business that we are in here with professional sports, and, of course, the reality of the Cincinnati Reds. Seemingly each and every year, a couple of the stars tend to get hurt here in spring training, but fingers crossed, good thoughts, good vibes. Of course, as Gino would say, that does not happen to anybody this go around here in spring training. But we'll walk through what Mark Sheldon said. Not a ton of surprises, but there is one relatively big surprise, I would say, and that's going to be a big conversation piece for us on today's show. Also, the Xavier Musketeers were in action again last night, and certainly different from UC, right? They're not winning many games. They now have lost 6 road games in a row. But they hang in there against some good teams. They give themselves opportunities. Gave St. John's, once again, everything they could handle. This time at the Garden, of course. Richard Pitino goes up against his father, Rick Pitino. Pitino set some more history against his son, Richard, there as well. Got win number 900 at the toss a couple of weeks ago. And then he passes Roy Williams for number 3 overall in the wins list as far as college basketball coaches go. Does that last night with a win over his son. But he also said after the game, like, St. John's 2-0 against Xavier this year, but I think you could argue that Xavier outplayed him both times. Just didn't end up with a victory, so we'll have some Xavier Musketeer thoughts on today's show. Also, Dane Brugler of The Athletic. He puts his Beast out. That's not out yet. That'll be out shortly, where he breaks down all the NFL draft prospects, but he did release his top 100 prospects, so important to understand this isn't a mock, right? He just lists the 100 best players, regardless of position, in this coming NFL draft. We'll break down the top 15. Bengals, of course, pick at number 10 overall, and I do think there's some interesting notes as well. Some people have mentioned these particular players as Bengals targets at number 10 that didn't even crack his top 30, so we will discuss that on today's show. Fully timed for the NFL Combine. That's underway in a couple of weeks. For whatever reason, I thought that was later in March. I was there last year. We'll see if we make it out this year, but yeah, that's coming up here. They don't waste much time after the Super Bowl and the NFL offseason really gets into full force here. So stick around for some Combine coverage. Again, I don't know if I'll be there exactly. We're working through the details there, but we're going to break down some of Brugler's top prospects. Also, speaking of a prospect, he was a top prospect last year. That was James Pierce Jr., and I guess we sort of owe the Bengals an apology. I don't know about that. Maybe that's a little extreme, but if you've flipped on the news anytime recently, you know that James Pierce Jr. is up to no good, and he was a guy that had a great year on the football field for the Atlanta Falcons that the Bengals passed on, had some character issues going into the draft last year, and certainly looks like the Bengals made the right decision. We'll talk about that a little bit, and then to round out today's show, we're going to kind of have an NFL series that we do over the course of the next week or so with some different NFL offseason conversation topics, and today we're going to start with retirement talk. two players that we're going to talk on. There was really three superstars kind of going into this offseason that we speculated might hang it up. One, of course, was Matthew Stafford. And he, of course, announced at NFL Honors that he's not retiring. Great decision. I didn't expect him to retire. But, getting up there in age, it was floated around last offseason as well. You never know. At this stage of his career, it's very much a year-by-year thing. But Stafford will be back. Certainly good for the Los Angeles Rams. Two other names that we're going to discuss to round out today's show. But make sure you like today's stream if you haven't done so already. Subscribe to the channel and leave us a 5-star review wherever you find our podcast. I've seen some pretty good growth over the course of the past few weeks as it relates to that. So if you can't watch live, totally get it. Middle of the day here on a weekday, the podcast is out wherever you get your podcast. So leave us a 5-star review. Apple, iHeart, Spotify, you name it. It works for us. All right, let's dive into this roster projection for Mark Sheldon, friend of the show, MLB.com. Has been covering the Reds since like 2006. I think has done a really nice job for a really long time. And it's a 26-man roster, right, on opening day. And opening day is March 26th against the Boston Red Sox. And we are, of course, in the year of our Lord, 2026. So lots of 26s there to maneuver through. But let's start at the catcher position, right? There's been talk about the arbitration of Tyler Stephenson, trying to figure out what that price point looks like. He's going to be your starting catcher on opening day. I think that is a foregone conclusion at this point. And the backup is going to be Jose Trevino. So the backstop is going to look identical to how it did last year. And I think that's something, I'm not going to necessarily call it a strength for Cincinnati, but something you feel good about, right? I think Tyler Stephenson has his career panned out to what the expectations were when he was drafted and maneuvering through the minor leagues. Maybe not, but he's a really good professional catcher, right? And he's a guy that you want out there more days than not. Obviously, at that position, you're going to have some off days, but you feel good about him hitting against lefties, hitting against righties, and you feel good about him in the field as well. You feel good about him throwing out some runners. I think his defense needs to improve a little bit, certainly from where it was last year, but you feel confident that he's able to do it. The biggest thing with him is staying healthy, staying off the injured list, a list in which he's kind of frequented here over the past few years. But I'm a big Tyler Stephenson guy. In a lot of ways, I think he's the heartbeat of this team. People said that about Jonathan India for a couple of years, had the great rookie year, and then it didn't, build off that the way a lot of us had hoped for. But to me, I would say Tyler Stephenson seems to be the leader. Makes me feel old, but he's like kind of their older guy, right? I mean, I remember it feels like just the other day when he was getting called up, but that's not the case here with the young roster. They look at him to be the leader, and he needs to lead vocally as well as his performance on the diamond there as well. And he's going to be back. He's going to be your starter, and you feel good about Trevino being the backup, right? Would you like to see a little bit more consistency from him? Sure. Remember, he got off to the great start the first month of the year last year, and we were all excited, and then offensively it certainly kind of dropped off, but had a great rapport with the staff. Much of the staff, of course, is back when you're talking about Abbott, Lodolo, Green, and Singer. And whoever the fifth guy is, there's some work there for the most part. Rhett Lauder was out last year with several different injuries, but Chase Burns, a guy that we'll talk about in the mix, he has some experience working with Trevino, and Williamson, of course, was hurt there as well. So I think the job of a backup catcher is you really got to do a nice job helping manage the staff, building a rapport with not only the starters, but the bullpen guys there as well. Trevino's been doing it for a while. He's a veteran guy, and if you can get a little bit more production from him, a little bit more consistent production throughout the course of the year offensively, you feel good. But, he's your backup catcher. You don't expect him to go out there and hit 30 bombs, right, and, hit 300 and get on base left and right. It's just not really the reality of the situation. But that position, barring an injury, is pretty much set in stone, I would say, at catcher. Infielders, Sheldon lists 4. We'll talk about Suarez in a second. He designates him as the designated hitter. But I think it's pretty clear. Matty McLain, Elly, Sal Stewart, Ke'Bryan Hayes. Those are your 4 guys. Ke'Bryan Hayes just picked up his second Gold Glove in 2025. What a year he had in the field. And, when you're the Reds, we talk about this a lot. When you make moves, whether it be a signing in free agency or a trade, it's rarely going to be a perfect situation, right? And the Reds rolled the dice. They went with defense, and they picked up a guy that they knew was an absolute stud with the glove in the field. But there were certainly questions about his stick, how that would work, how if that could get any better, which I think, it is. The proof's in the pudding at this point. I think with Ke'Bryan Hayes, is he going to have some magnificent year where he hits 340 and drives in a bunch of runs? Probably not. We kind of know what he is at this point, but I think the Reds made the gamble that the defense is going to make up for that and make it worth it. And if he can stay on the field, I think that is true. Unfortunately, with him there as well, there's the injury risk, right? He's had this chronic back stuff throughout the course of his career. Didn't rear its ugly head after the trade when Cincinnati got him, but I think it's fair to assume that he's probably going to have a stint or two on the injured list. You have some confidence that Gino can play third base. He did it here in this town for a really long time, but that guy's a lock, and you hope that you can get some improvement with the bats, but he's a bottom third hitter in your lineup, right? He's not going to be in a position where, oh my goodness, Ke'Bryan Hayes is batting fifth. That's not happening. He's 7, 8, or 9, and that's going to be the case throughout the majority, certainly, of the season. Elly, of course, at shortstop. Reds hoping for a real big year from him. Played in all 162 games last year, played through the injury. A lot was talked about as it related to, well, he hit some home runs the first half of the year, and then he hit, 4 after the All-Star break. Need a little bit more consistency there. However, now that you have Suarez, Elly's role can be a little bit different. Elly, of course, has great power, and I think the Reds probably will be at their best and reaching their full potential when he's hitting the ball over the fence on a relatively consistent basis. But last year, when he wasn't hitting home runs, they didn't have anyone that could hit home runs, right? A little bit different this go around with Suarez in your lineup, and maybe not as much power will be required from Elly, but certainly needs to get on base. We certainly want him to use his speed more, right? Again, he had the injury that we didn't really find out about until after the year, but need to see more stolen bases from Elly De La Cruz, need to see, of course, less strikeouts, and he can really be a guy. That's why I want him batting leadoff so much, is if he gets on and you have that kind of speed, more than likely he's coming around to score, especially after you added some beef to that lineup with Eugenio Suarez. But I've said it before on the show, it's not a hot take. It's probably me being Captain Obvious, but this team offensively is going to go where Elly De La Cruz can take him. We'll see what he's capable of this year. And then Sal Stewart, is there a world where they try him in the outfield? Maybe down the line, but that's not going to be happening this year. You're looking at DH a little bit, but again, they don't want him to be the DH. I'm just saying a couple of times throughout the year, maybe more than a couple, he will be the DH. I agree with everything Tito said. You don't want a 22-year-old DH, right? You got to give him an opportunity to really be a well-rounded player. This isn't Eugenio Suarez, a veteran guy. He's a 22-year-old kid. And that's where does he fit in, right? Obviously, you have boxes checked at third base and second base defensively, so the most logical position seems to be first. Again, injuries are going to happen. There's going to be adjustments. Different guys are going to have to play different positions. But how that looks like in the field will be very critical for Cincinnati, because we've talked about this a lot on the show. I have a little bit of concern. Being a small market club, you better pitch and you better play defense. Reds didn't play defense well enough last year, and you look what they did this offseason. Yeah, we're intrigued by some of the acquisitions and trades and signings that they made, but if you're moving your Gold Glove caliber first baseman off that position to put a guy where it's kind of a shot in the dark in terms of what he's capable, Sal Stewart, right? Well, then you put Spencer out in left, great utility guy, below average defensive left fielder. Noelvi Marte's out in right. He's still making the adjustment from being an infielder his whole life. We know the errors that are going to come with Elly at shortstop, and you're looking across the field going, okay, we got some issues here defensively. And that's kind of the biggest concern a lot of us have going into this year. So hopefully Sal Stewart in spring training is lights out. They feel good about him being the everyday first baseman. You go from there. But I think I would be a little bit surprised if that was the case. But those 4 guys for the infield, complete locks. We know this. We understand this. Mark then lists 6 outfielders, which, again, you might say 6 is too much there. Again, he only had 4 infielders with the DH being a separate spot, so it's basically 5. That's kind of the normal number there. But, again, no surprises here. Friedel, Marte, Steer, Blade, Myers, Benson. Friedel has been really just a mark of consistency for the Reds, and I think he would get maybe a little bit more credit if there was enough talent around him. But what he's done as a leadoff guy, I remember when he was called up years ago, and we're like, who is this guy? And he had the weird haircut, and it's like, is this guy really our guy? And he's turned into the everyday center fielder. So he's really made a career out of it. You got to tip your hat to him, and you got to hope that he can kind of maintain what he's been able to do. I think it's safe to say defensively he took a slight step backward this past year. Maybe did he lose a quarter of a step as he gets a little bit older? Maybe. But the Reds need him to lock things up in center field, and I also think you feel better about that position now because Dane Myers, it's a little bit of a question as far as what he can do for you offensively, but by all accounts, this dude's a stud in the field. And for years, the Reds really haven't had a backup to TJ Friedel, so if he's in a spot where he gets hurt or he needs a day off, you're kind of like, oh, Will Benson out in center field. Like, you don't really feel great about that. Defensively, if Friedel needs a day or he gets nicked up, what have you, you feel good about Dane Myers manning that position. And also he provides some versatility there as well. He can play the corner spots, can Dane Myers. So that's a really interesting move that Cincinnati made. I think a lot of us are kind of, you can dive into the numbers a little bit and see, but like what Dane Myers is going to bring to this team, I think is a big question mark. And, there's a couple of guys that like that where it's like, well, maybe they bring him in and he's not very good. And it's like, well, that's not really much of a surprise, right? He was playing for the Marlins and wasn't great for them. But also they're betting on the ceiling, right? Maybe this guy comes in, gets off to a great start, playing great defense, hits a couple of home runs. Next thing you know, you really got a force there in your outfield rotation. So that's certainly a situation to monitor. Noelvi, he's playing every day. Lefties, righties, he'll be out there in right field. Very interested to see what his development looks like defensively. I think, again, when he was thrown out there, when they made the move, like, all right, you know what, we're moving in a different direction at third base, obviously bringing in Key Brian Hayes, Noelvi, we want your stick in the lineup. You're a piece of our line or piece of our team, a foundational pillar of our team going forward. You're going to be out in right field, and he hung in there. I thought, did it look beautiful at all times? No, but he hung in there, and we'll see what kind of growth and development he made this offseason there out in the outfield. And that's going to be really intriguing because, again, you look across this diamond, there's some defensive question marks, and you really hope that Noelvi put in the work this offseason and is ready to go and play right field each and every day. Now, I think the one thing that is interesting a little bit here, again, there's 6 outfielders on this list from Sheldon. Blade and Benson. Are both those guys going to make the team? Similar as far as what they can do, right? Corner outfielders, lefties with some power. Is it beneficial to have 2 of those guys that are left-handed in what predominantly is a right-handed hitting lineup for the Cincinnati Reds? I think so. I think that's fair to say. But at the same time, if they're, giving you pretty much the same output as far as how effective they are getting on base, driving in runs, hitting the ball over the fence, do you want to keep them both? I don't know. So that's a camp battle to monitor there for Cincinnati. Who plays better, Will Benson or J.J. Bleday? And, I think there's some people certainly here at this company that have maybe a little bit too much love for Will Benson, who, again, if you ever go to a game and watch in person, Will Benson's one of those guys that you will fall in love with because his hustle is so apparent when you're there in person. And also the dude's a tank. He's absolutely huge. He's jacked. And if he gets a hold of that thing, it's going for a ride, right? But at the end of the day, people make fun of Tito for seemingly having some kind of vendetta against Will Benson, which it does seem like that is the case. But, let's not act like Will Benson's an all-star here, right? So it'll be interesting to see what they do with him in Bleday and if they both make the team or not. Will Benson, of course, has been here for several years. There's more of a familiarity aspect there, but there is also the intrigue of, we brought in this guy Bleday. Let's see what he can do. That will be fascinating to see if both these guys make the opening day roster. DH, Gino. We're all excited. Let's roll. Good vibes. Let's hit the ball over the fence. Let's drive in runs. He's going to be your guy at that spot. A lot of us have been bemoaning the fact that Cincinnati has not had a DH, right? I mean, Gavin Lux, good ball player, not a DH, right? And this DH rule has been in place for a while now. This didn't just pop up. And Cincinnati finally has a guy that is a true DH. He's going to be asked to play the field from time to time. We know this. We understand this. Whether it be third base, whether it be first base. Again, there's this narrative out there that Gino – he can play first base. He's played 6 innings there professionally, so I have confidence that he can figure it out, but let's not act like you can just plug him in there and it's going to work, right? Like you got other options that you would rather go with as far as who's going to play first base for you from a defensive perspective. But you have your DH, right? He can hit lefties. He can hit righties. He can hit the ball over the fence. And I think the Reds are going to be a part of some quick games this year. Obviously, you have the new rules. We got to stop calling them the new rules because they've been in place for a while now that ultimately speed up the game. But you got a lot of guys that are striking out, and you got some guys, or you got a guy in Gino that's going to hit the ball over the fence, right? And you got some pitchers that work quickly and get a lot of strikeouts and get a lot of outs in general. So I think you're going to be in a position where you get some quick games this year for the Cincinnati Reds. But Gino, your DH, I think we're all pretty excited about it. Your rotation, 5 guys, obviously. 4 guys, you just fingers crossed that they're ready to go as far as health. I was never a pitcher, but just kind of getting ramped up, right? They talk about that a lot throughout spring training, right? They can't just not pitch all offseason or do their workouts and then, boom, they're ready to go opening day. It's a ramping up process that happens. And if guys get banged up or they miss a start or two here in spring training, it takes them a little bit longer, which can impact when they're ready to go for the start of the year. Pitchers are very finicky, I guess, that way. But, yeah, your 4 guys, you fingers crossed they're healthy because you got 4 dudes right there: Hunter Green, Andrew Abbott, Nick Lodolo, and Brady Singer. You got a mix, right? I mean, 2 lefties, 2 righties, which is really intriguing. You got a guy with great strikeout stuff in Green and Lodolo, and you got guys that just know how to pitch in Brady Singer and Andrew Abbott, who are just kind of bulldogs out there that just compete their butts off. If those guys are healthy and out there, you feel good about this team making the playoffs, truly. You really do. We had Freddie Benavides on. What did he say? He said that the identity of this team is their starting pitching. We all knew this, but to hear it from Freddie lets everybody know that I know I just said this team's going to go where Elly De La Cruz can take them offensively, but as a team in general, this team's going where their starting pitching can take them, and you feel pretty fired up about the 4 guys that you have. Now, the biggest question here in spring training, you could argue, who's going to hit number 2. I think that's a big question as well for Cincinnati, but who's going to be that 5th guy? And this is the one thing that I would say was maybe a little bit surprising from Mark Sheldon. He has it being Rhett Lauder out of Wake Forest. A lot of us were hyped when Cincinnati drafted him. Missed all of last year, arm, shoulder, oblique. It was kind of a variety of different things for Rhett Lauder. I'm excited about him as a future starter for this team. He will be a starter. He's not going to be a bullpen guy. Is it going to be now or is it going to be a little bit later on? I don't know. I really have no clue. I don't have an answer for you. I don't have a lean. There's really 3 guys that are competing for that spot. It's Rhett Lauder, it's Chase Burns, and it's Brandon Williamson. 2 of those guys coming off injuries, Rhett Lauder and Brandon Williamson. But if Rhett Lauder's your 5 going into opening day, you feel pretty darn good about your rotation. But, he's a youngster. We'll see what he's capable of doing. But I think all of us are pretty excited about the future of Rhett Lauder. We'll get to the controversial aspect here in a second. Relief guys, 8. It'll be around that number. Maybe it's not exactly 8. But Pagan, he's back as your closer. It was like the first thing you did this offseason. Tony Santillan's back, who we're all fired up about that. The guy just works, right? I have a joke with some buddies where it's like, the Reds are playing, Tony Santillan's working today. Right, regardless, I don't care if you're winning, I don't care if you're losing, I don't care what inning it is, Tony Santillan is working. And Tito's going to ride him again this year. And then you got your new guys, Pierce Johnson, Caleb Ferguson, Brock Burke, Nick Kirby, and others have done a great job diving into those guys. Check out those videos if you haven't seen it. Check out the podcast as well. Don't really have much for you. There's some lefties in there, which is intriguing, obviously, for Cincinnati, and we'll see how those guys do. It's bullpen. It's so hard to project. I think it's probably the hardest thing to do in baseball if you're putting together a team is like, all right, how do we assemble this bullpen and how do we know that there's going to be a consistency element to this? And you don't is really the best way you can put it, especially at the closer spot. Like, how can you say this guy had a great year this year, he can do it again next year? Well, you can evaluate his stuff, but how do you know that the moment isn't going to get a little bit too big for him? He might walk a guy here or there, might have some control issues, might hit a guy, right? Might throw a really good pitch. That gets hit. That happens in this league all the time. So projecting how a bullpen is going to perform is nearly impossible. There's some new pieces in there with some stabilizing factors and stabilizing pieces in Pagan and Santillan. And he also has Graham Ashcraft, Connor Phillips, and Chase Burns, which is the controversial aspect of that. I like Connor Phillips. I always have. He comes in, he throws hard, he competes. And, I think at one point maybe you thought his ceiling was going to be a little bit higher, but I think he'd be a really solid bullpen guy for you, and I would like him to make the team. Same with Doug Ashcraft. He started for this team for a while. He's got the mentality of a relief pitcher, and he's not really a guy seemingly that's going to complain. Does he want to be a starter? Probably, but he wants to go out there and compete. Thought he did a nice job out of the pen for the most part. And then Chase Burns. You picked him number 2 overall. So a lot of people would sit there and say, you don't want the number 2 overall pick being a relief pitcher. Like, that's just a terrible investment right there. I probably would agree with that. It's a little bit different if you let Pagan walk and you look at Chase Burns and say you're going to be our closer, right? That's a little bit different. But if you're not even going to give him that role, which they're not with Pagan in place, do you want him to be in the pen? I think if he's in the pen this year, it doesn't mean he's going to always be in the pen. But, he was in the pen at the end of last year. So that would be – you remember the Reds did this with Aroldis Chapman, funnily enough, where he came up when he was making his run through the minor leagues. He was a starter. And then the Reds said, you're going to be in the bullpen. And obviously we all know him as a closer, and he's made a career out of being a closer. Again, it's different if Chase Burns was going to be the closer this year. That I could get on board with. But, you're just going to throw him in the pen. Again, I think he really improved the bullpen of Cincinnati. It's like, we got the number 2 overall pick sitting in the pen ready to come in and throw 400 miles an hour. That was pretty exciting. But is that really getting the most out of that draft pick? Obviously not. And that'll be interesting. It just comes down to who's more ready, right? I think the Reds are probably in a spot where they got to decide between Lauder, Williamson, and Burns who's more ready to start, but also realize that the guy that doesn't win that 5th spot isn't just some bum, isn't some guy that they want in the minor leagues. They can still help this big league team. So I don't know from a pitching perspective how that could, stunt his growth, if at all. If they're in a spot where it's like, well, you're not good enough to be our 5 yet, but we want you to be a starter in the future, but we also think you can bring value to the big league club, so we'll put you in the pen. Is he going to be able to do that and then start next year or what have you? I don't know how that works. And also, again, he will be a starter at some point this year. Somebody's going to get hurt. Somebody's going to, not play well and, be in a spot where they get moved off of. So all these guys are going to throw, but what it looks like the first month of the season is what we're trying to figure out here at this point. So I won't be ticked off if they put Burns in the pen. Again, how could you? It was great seeing him in the pen last year. It's just the argument of, well, you picked him 2nd overall. Like, you need a little bit more than a bullpen pitcher, which I get that as well. Fair. But that to me is so fascinating. Anytime Lauder, Burns, and Williamson have the ball in spring training, it's going to be must watch if you're a Reds fan. And it'll be fun to kind of evaluate over the course of the next few weeks. And ultimately, we'll see what DJ and Tito decide to do. But for the most part, no real surprises here from Mark Sheldon. Do you take my 2 biggest takeaways on things that might not be fully true, or are you taking both Bleday and Benson on opening day, number 1, and also who's that 5th guy going to be? And I think that's a lot of us have that question there as well. But fired up. Pitchers and catchers reported yesterday, and before we know it, it will be opening day here in Cincinnati, and that is a fun time if you are a Cincinnati sports fan. We all know this. All right, let's see, Xavier. Xavier's a fascinating team to me. They lost in overtime in the Garden, right, to St. John's. St. John's ranked, 17? I think St. John's coming into this year, I thought they would go on a run last year in the tournament. Didn't work out that way. I think a lot of people thought they'd be one of the best teams in the country this year. Clearly not, but clearly a top 25 team, and clearly a team that, has some dangerous elements to them once they get to the tournament come March. But Xavier's played him twice, and Rick Pitino, Richard's father, of course, mentioned they outplayed him twice. They, being Xavier, outplayed St. John's twice, but they went 0-2 in those games. And a little bit of a side note here, we were talking about, in the first game, it was Coach Pitino, Rick, trying to get his 900th win. He did. Picked it up against his son, Richard. Xavier should have won that game, more so even than the game last night. They really had a great opportunity to win. Weren't able to do it. And then last night, Rick sets a little bit more history against his son, passed Roy Williams for 3rd on the all-time wins list. So that's something he will have over Richard for quite some time. But he's talking after the game. It's his mindset here is he's very proud of Richard and what he's been able to accomplish, thinks he's a brilliant young coach, and he was not, bragging or throwing any jabs or anything like that. Their relationship is not like that whatsoever. But some opportunities for Xavier. Trey Carroll had a slow start to the game. But he really came on in the second half. He went off the first time that they played at the Cintas Center at a career high that game. But he scored with 47 seconds left to take the lead. And then St. John's gets the ball back, and Xavier forced 3 misses on that possession before ultimately giving up a basket. So they couldn't pick up a defensive rebound. Had a chance to grab a board and essentially ice the game. Weren't able to do that. And you look at the makeup of their roster, it just kind of makes sense. Just look at the roster and look at the heights of the guys. They don't have any big dudes. And to not get a defensive rebound in that moment's got to be sickening. And then they get to overtime. But I think once St. John's came back and forced the overtime session, Xavier was in a really tough spot. They turned it over 3 of their first 5 possessions in overtime, and St. John's ultimately came away with the win. Also, another huge stat in this game, St. John's attempted 44 free throws, which they didn't shoot very well from the line. Neither team did. And Xavier only attempted 17. And that, again, has been an issue for Xavier all year, just struggling to get to the stripe. Richard Pitino said after the game it wasn't an issue with the officials, but it's been a problem with them all year, not being able to get to the free throw line, and that's certainly impacting their ability to win games. I mean, their DNA as a team, we've seen it, right? They shoot it from the outside, and they throw it down to Trey Carroll, and they let him go to work. That's kind of their basis of how they operate as a team, which I think going forward, that it can't be a recipe in order to have a ton of success in the Big East, but they're making do with the roster in which they have. So, again, my biggest takeaway with Xavier is you got to be fired up if you're a Xavier fan. I thought this year for them was going to be just atrocious, and I thought they'd be getting blown out left and right. And have they gotten blown out a few times? Yeah, obviously the UConn game recently was really ugly, but they're hanging in there against some good teams. They're losing on the road, but they're competing. 6 straight losses on the road. You look at the roster, and Trey Carroll plays his heart out, and he's had a really nice year. But, I mean, not to disrespect any of these guys, but Borovichinin and Milicevic, Messina Moore. I mean, these aren't elite basketball players, right? We know this. We understand this. So it'll be interesting to see what they do next year. I think they're going to get a ton of money thrown into their team. I think if you're a Xavier donor and you have a brain, you should, right? If you're watching these games and seeing what Pitino's been able to do, it really has been unbelievable what he's been able to do with this team. And more people would be talking about it if they have just closed a few of these games, right? Kind of reminds you a little bit of UC, not this year, but last year, where it was like they had opportunity after opportunity after opportunity to win these games, and they couldn't quite finish, but the expectation level was a lot higher for UC last year than it is for Xavier this year. I think a lot of us are surprised they're even in these games, but at the same time, you're also kicking yourself if you're a Xavier fan for the fact that they haven't been able to capitalize on at least a couple of more of these games. But Xavier basketball is in a great spot. Need to get some more money thrown into that program. Pitino clearly is the guy to lead the charge here. I know UC just beat UCF, which congrats, I guess, but there's not a Cincinnati fan that wouldn't rather have Richard Pitino as their head coach at this point. So there's going to be that window, 3-4 years probably for Pitino to make some damage, make a run in March, have a really good team, be ranked throughout the majority of the year, and then he probably will get poached by a bigger school. And that's just kind of the nature of where Xavier is, kind of a stepping stone program. You see it. I mean, look at their history, right? Miller, he's there, he leaves, he comes back, he leaves again. Travis Steele, of course, got fired. Chris Mack, leaves for a bigger job at the time going to Louisville. So that's just kind of how it is at Xavier. But they're going to have a window here to execute. And if you're a donor or you're somebody that's involved with the basketball team, you better recognize it and you better be aggressive here when it comes to NIL and funding the program this offseason, because I really do think they're in a great spot. And also Anthony Robinson, how about him? I think his emergence has been noteworthy over the course of the past few games. Really wasn't getting much tick at all. We didn't say his name once going into the crosstown shootouts. Sophomore, forward. I thought he had some big plays in the game last night. I think got the double figures maybe for the first time. But I think he had 10 points last night. Transfer from Virginia, sophomore, has some of that size, and Pitino talked about it after the game, kind of trying to cut him loose a little bit, get him some more tick out there on the floor, get him some more minutes, and I think that's a guy in Robinson, talk about, this roster being totally different next year, I think that's a guy you want to try to keep around if you're Richard Pitino, and it'll be interesting to see how he continues to develop because, again, he wasn't getting many minutes, even to start Big East play, really didn't see much of him, and you're seeing him get out there on the floor, and I think he provides kind of a spark, had a couple of dunks in transition in the game last night, so that's a guy to keep an eye on that we haven't really said his name at all here on the show. But Xavier falls in overtime, 87-82. But the vibe, that side of town, totally different than the vibe at Fifth Third Arena here at this point. By the way, one other college basketball note before we get into this list from Dane Brugler. The Miami Redhawks, how about them? They are the last undefeated team in college basketball. What a story. What an unbelievable story. They're going to take that undefeated record and see what they can do with it on Friday at home, Millett Hall against OU. Place is going to be jumping. They've had some time here because they didn't play since over the weekend. Don't have a midweek game, so they're going to be rested, ready to go on Friday. Oxford's going to be buzzing. Millett Hall is going to be jumping. And mind you, when I was there, And I've talked at length here on the show about being at these games, whether I was working or just checking them out as a student and nobody being there. Well, the OU games, there was actually some people there. And that was the most I had ever saw Millette filled out when I was there, was when they played OU. Right, so there is very much a rivalry there between Ohio and Miami, and if they can sort of fill up when they absolutely stink and nobody cares about the team, well, what's it going to look like on Friday when they're undefeated at home in a rivalry game? That's going to be awesome. That's going to be just absolutely tremendous on ESPN, and it's a late game too. It's not at 7. I believe it's at 9 o'clock, so the beverages are going to be flowing up in Oxford leading into tip-off there, and the environment's going to be absolutely bonkers. ESPN rivalry. Can't wait for that as, Arizona loses last night. I think my thing on Arizona, clearly they're an unbelievable team. They're a great team. They got a great freshman. They got Jaden Bradley, kind of the guy, their point guard that has been there for several years, Alabama transfer, been around the block, played a lot of college hoops. They got a coach in Tommy Lloyd who deserves a lot of credit. A well-respected coach, certainly has struggled in the tournament. But the idea of them running the table with the schedule, if you take a look at Arizona's schedule, it's an absolute gauntlet. And I've always been hesitant to, say they're going to win it all, right? It's kind of how I was with Sam Darnold, right? Like, I just need to see it. I've seen Arizona choke in the tournament too many times to go out there and crown them already. So it was only a matter of time before they lost. And they do it. They lose to Kansas without Darren Peterson, which I think – We'll spend a segment. Maybe we'll do this in one of our pre-recorded shows. I think the story of college basketball clearly this year is the freshmen, which is great because a lot of these freshmen, there's like 7 or 8 of them. There's more than that, but 7 or 8 are going to be like top-of-the-line NBA draft picks, which I think is very positive because I think the reason why the NFL and the NFL draft is such a popular event and so many people are tuned into it is because there's that bridge between college football and the NFL. I always feel like the NBA hasn't always wrapped their arms around college basketball, which I think is a huge mistake. Granted, there's a lot of college basketball players that are really good college basketball players that don't have a prayer of playing in the NBA, but so often, especially over the course of the past few years, you get a lot of these top prospects, these top draft picks are from overseas. And we're all like, yeah, great, congrats. We'll try to watch you in the NBA, but we know nothing about you here in America, right? And, I don't want to stereotype too much, but do you really have these international guys that come in and have these big personalities, right? I mean, look at Luka and Jokic, 2 of the best players in the league, but it's not like they're going out and, creating headlines when they're talking to the media, and they're not really flashy. They're just kind of show up, go to work. They treat it like a job, and then they're like, yeah, I just kind of want to go home and hang out. Luka's like, give me a beer. Jokic is like, yeah, I want my horses, right? There isn't really something we can attach ourselves to, right? And I think with these freshmen, going early in the draft is a great opportunity for the NBA to kind of improve their relationship with college basketball and really grow the popularity of both sports, right? Because I know a ton of people that love March Madness and then they couldn't give a rat's about the NBA. I think that should change, right? It's the same game. It's different. You're getting paid millions. Well, both are getting paid millions of dollars now, but millions and millions more dollars in the NBA. But I've never really understood that. The NBA's got to do a way better job of wrapping their arms around college basketball because that's why the NFL draft and the combine and, this offseason talk in the NFL is so good because college football, we understand that is basically the minor leagues, right? That's kind of like AAA in baseball That's kind of the next step in order to get to the NFL. I think the NBA could do a better job of that. However, getting back to the freshman, Darren Peterson, you watch him play, there have been some names that get thrown around. Like somebody said Kobe, and I get pretty fired up when somebody just wants to casually compare somebody to Kobe Bean Bryant. Look, you can't. I mean, all the games he's missed, you can't compare him to Kobe Bean Bryant. I don't care how good he is out there on the floor. I think that's a horrible comparison. However, he's a really good player. He can be a really good NBA player. He can be the best player on a team that wins a title. Like all the talent is there. If you haven't watched him, watch him. Well, you got to be careful, though, because you don't know if he's playing or not. But he can do it all. He can defend. He can get to the rim. He can shoot, right? He's a big moment guy. He's played his best in some of Kansas's biggest games. However, he's missed a ton of games. I think he's missed like 11 or 12, right? And it was really some of it was really weird, where he goes out there and he plays the first half and plays great, and then all of a sudden the second half he's just not really out there. And it's like, well, he has this hamstring. It's like, Does he have a hamstring, or is he like trying to be healthy for the draft? Like, I don't know. It's very fishy. He didn't play last night. Apparently it was an illness. The news broke like an hour and a half before the game. So there's some weird stuff going on. Enough to drop him out at number 1 overall? Probably not, but Dybonsa for BYU is incredible. I mean, we were talking about Arizona. Koa Pete is great. Boozer for Duke. He can't guard. He's a traffic cone defensively. It's probably why they lost to North Carolina over the weekend. Great offensive player. Kingston Flemings from Houston, just a complete dog. He might go 2 or 3. Probably not going to go over AJ or Peterson, but he probably could go 3. So, I mean, there's a ton of freshmen. That's kind of been the storyline of college basketball. But they lose last night, Arizona. And without Darren Peterson, I think Kansas is kind of a sneaky team, but they're trying to figure out how to play with Peterson because they've had to play so much without him. And then when he's out there, he wants the ball at all times, which, you don't want him to have the ball. He's that good of a player. But I think Kansas is kind of a sneaky team as it relates to March. Could they go on a run and piece together a few games? Maybe. But a win like that against Arizona without their best player is very, very impressive, and Bill Self deserves a ton of credit for that. But the Redhawks, how about them? The last one standing at undefeated, and they'll put that to the test on Friday against OU. All right, before we get out of here, I want to do these. We're not just going to read them off, but I've got some thoughts on these top prospects for Dane Brugler. He's kind of a draft guru. You got several of these guys. Daniel Jeremiah, of course, for NFL Network, and Dane Brugler is over at The Athletic, and he puts together his beast each and every year, which you haven't checked it out. You need to, because I don't know how he does it. But basically, every guy that could be drafted, he has every single piece of information basically down to what they eat for breakfast on each and every player. It really is remarkable. I don't know how he must spend just days and weeks and months on it, but it comes out. I don't know exactly when it's going to come out, but it's not out yet. But he's one of those guys where you hear him talk draft, you listen, and that's kind of how you can evaluate some of these guys because, again, we talked about this on the show. It's impossible to do these mock drafts, right, and to predict who's going to take who. Like, if you get the top 5 right, you're kind of a genius, right, and we all usually can get the top 2 or 3 right for the most part, but it's impossible to do this. So Dane Brugler is really, really good at what he does, and I want to break down some of these prospects. So he put out his top 100 prospects, regardless of position, right? And we'll talk about the Caleb Downs element to this in a second, but that's kind of the noteworthy piece, is that he's just going players, right? Doesn't matter if they're a kicker, right? There's not a kicker on this list, but if there was an elite one, he might throw him on here, right? Doesn't matter. At 1, and I agree with this as well, is Arvell Reese. I don't see a world where he doesn't get picked second, right? The Jets draft at 2, and if you're Arvell Reese, you're like, he's the last thing you want to do is go to New York because they're never going to be good. But the Raiders need a quarterback. They're taking Mendoza. We know that. But I think Arvell Reese, just look at him. Just open your eyes and look at him, and then watch him run, right? Watch him run after a guy and try to tackle him, and watch him shed a block and hit a guy. Watch him drop back and cover a guy for a second if he has to. He can just do it all. He's unbelievable. Kind of, I don't want to say no-showed, but for Ohio State, it's unbelievable, by the way, how many Buckeyes are on this list, and they still couldn't win a single postseason game. But in a couple of big moments there, not the Indiana game, but the Miami game, there was opportunities. I know the offense was playing horrible, and the defense for Miami was playing great, but that Ohio State defense was the best defense I had seen. I mean, I think you could throw the 11 Bama group in there. I mean, probably one of the best ones I'd ever seen. You could argue one of the best of all time. And they couldn't get off the field against Carson Beck. Right, and they had a bunch of guys that were going to get taken in the first round on that defense, 4 at least, and that's a little bit concerning. But he kind of no-showed a little bit, but what he was able to do for the beginning portions of the year, and just when you look at him, it's like, oh yeah, that guy's a stud, right? He just is. So Arvell Reese at 1, he'll go 2 to the Jets. Mendoza at 2, he'll go 1 to the Raiders. Kubiak, by the way, officially going to Las Vegas. I think it's a great hire for the Raiders. It'll be interesting to see how long Tom Brady, Johnny Spytek give him, because this thing's going to have to bake a little bit in Vegas, especially when you look around at that division. A lot of work to do, but I think you're on the right track, getting the head coach right. And, I like Davis Webb, but I think you need to see a little bit more. I would have been a little bit reckless, right, to go get Davis Webb. And I think there's more security with Clint Kubiak, what he likes to do under center, play action. Remember, a lot of RPO stuff for Mendoza at Indiana. I think they'll add that into the offense for Vegas. And it just goes to show, too, this is Kubiak's 6th team in 6 years. I mean, this profession is no joke. They get paid millions of dollars, so they make it work. But he's got young kids, he's married, and they're just moving all across the country, and we'll see how long he stays in Vegas. But Mendoza at 2. And then this is, interesting, right? Because Jeremiah Love, I totally agree with this. I think he's the I would probably put him at 4, but I think he's clearly a top 5 player in this draft, Jeremiah Love. However, he plays the running back position. And what Cincinnati needs is they need him to go in the top 9. And usually I would not draft a running back that high. Look at Vegas last year with Genty. They took him, 6th? And when you take a running back that high and your offensive line stinks and you can't throw the ball, he's not going to be good at all. So we all saw that coming. Not to say Genty's a bust. I'm not ready to go that far yet, but he's a running back. He needs guys to block for him in order to have success. That's pretty obvious, I would think. But Jeremiah Love, he's the real deal. The athleticism, the strength, the speed, he's got it all. He was probably one of my favorite players to watch in college football this past year, and the Bengals need him to go, right? Because they need somebody else defensively to stay on the board. Kansas City certainly is interesting. That's kind of the team that makes the most sense, I would say, for Love in the top 10 or the top 9 at this point. But clearly he's not going 3rd, but the Bengals are hoping he goes top 9. He's a great player. Now at number 4, and this is something we've talked about a lot, Caleb Downs. Again, he plays safety. For whatever reason, people out there want to devalue that position. I don't understand why. I don't, for the life of me, right? Cincinnati devalues it, and it bit him right in the rear end the past few years. I would probably put Downs at 3 above Jeremiah Love, but it's hard to imagine that the 4th best player in the draft is going to drop to 10. That's hard to believe, right? I understand he plays safety. But is Caleb Downs really going to be available for this team? Because there is a consensus agreement that he is one of the top players in this draft. And he's going to slide down to 10 just because of position? I don't know. I find it very hard to believe, which is also why if he's there, you have to take him. But Caleb Downs at 4. This one's interesting, and I agree as well. Sonny Styles at 5. Sonny Styles, I think, is going to be there at 10. And again, you could say, that's a little bit high for him. I'm okay with that because it's a foregone conclusion as far as what he can bring to the table for this team. What have I been saying, and most of you have been saying as well? Get a guy that we know can come in and be a good player. Is 10 a little bit aggressive for Sonny Styles? Should he be more 12 to 15? Maybe. But I know he can come in and play starting linebacker in the NFL and have success, right? If all your guys are gone, Bailey's gone, Bain's gone, Downs is gone, take Sonny Styles at 10, right? Don't overthink it. I get he's a linebacker, and I get you just drafted 2 linebackers. Sonny Styles can play, and I agree. Brugler's got him at 5 overall, and that means he's above Bailey and Bain and all these other guys as well. 6, he has David Bailey. Again, I like Bailey a little bit more than Bain personally. He's a dog, great athlete, athletic, can jump too, which I think is big for these edge guys now. I mean, how often, you watch the Bengals, you see it all the time. Joe Burrow's getting passes batted down left and right. To have a guy that can do that and bat some passes down for your defense, I think can go a long way. But I like David Bailey a lot. To me, that's 2 for me. If Downs is gone, take David Bailey, assuming that obviously he's available. Mansour Delane at 7. We've seen the Bengals get mocked with McCoy, and my thing was Delane's a much better corner. Brugler agrees with that. I wouldn't be ticked off, right, if, again, Downs and Bailey are off the board, Arvell Reese, all those guys are gone, and you're sitting there like, Delane's still on the board. I would take him, right? I wouldn't take him over Sonny Styles, but I would take him because, you have your corners figured out, but nobody's going to get hurt, nobody's going to get dinged up. I think adding a 3rd one into the mix would be good, and I think Delane is going to be, again, he's going to be a good player. There's no Shamar Stewart element here of, he might be good. No, Delane's going to be a good player. Brugler's got him at 7. Fano at 8. That would be don't do it, right? I'm not going to say worst case scenario. I don't study offensive line play much. Apparently he's going to be a really good tackle. You need a defender at that spot, right? It'd be one thing if you didn't have Orlando Brown Jr. for another year and you were desperate for a left tackle. Stay away. He's going to be a good player, but you don't need that at all. Ruben Bain at 9. Arm length, probably a bit of concern. for him, but you saw him show up in big-time moments. I think we'd all be pretty ecstatic to get Ruben Bain on this team. Carnell Tate at 10, which that makes what? 4 Ohio State Buckeyes in his top 10 with more coming. You would think they won a playoff game, right? Oh, I guess not. I'm not quite sure what happened there. There's people out there that think Cincinnati needs to add to their offense. I don't understand it at all. Carnell Tate's probably going to be a good player. I'm not as convicted as I am about Caleb or Sonny Styles or Arvell Reese or maybe even K-Mac to an extent, but, kind of a weak wide receiver class, and he seems like him and the Arizona kid or the Arizona State kid, Tyson, are probably the two best. Maui Noah at 11. Tackle from Miami. Again, Fano and Maui Noah are the consensus 2 top tackles. Okay. That's a next year thing. That's not a this year thing. Need a defender. Jordan Tyson, the receiver out of Arizona State, 12. 13, the interior offensive lineman for Penn State. Makai Lemon at 14, which I know he won the Biletnikoff, but to me that's a little aggressive. He's kind of small. I honestly thought Jacoby Lane was the better receiver on that USC team. I know that's a hot take, but I honestly believe that. And here we go, 15. Keldrick Falk. I don't see it. I really don't. There's a reason why he's on these lists. Like, clearly he's got some traits. Clearly he's got some production he can play. But to me, that's not a road that Cincinnati wants to go down. And I would not do it at 10. I was a little bit surprised to see him that high. But that's a stay-away guy for me. There's really, at this point, 2 stay-away guys. Falk's one of them. One from Clemson, we'll talk about him in a second, and the other would be just a non-defender for the Cincinnati Bengals, but I didn't like that. Jermod McCoy, who the Bengals have been linked to in some mock drafts, corner out of Tennessee, should be a good player in the NFL. I think the lane's clearly better. Akeem Mesidor at 19, which is interesting. I don't think he's in this spot if Miami doesn't go on the run in the playoffs. I thought he was more of a second or third round pick, honestly, which he clearly had a great college football playoff run. I wouldn't be mad if they took him, but he's not a top 10 player. I think that's pretty obvious to me. And then I threw Caleb Banks on this list. Brugler has him at 24. What was noteworthy about that is the highest defensive tackle in this class, all the way down at 24. So you can, forget about trying to get a guy at number 10 to beef up your interior defensive line. Those guys don't exist, which they existed last year in the draft. They existed last year in free agency, but you look at free agency in the draft this go-around, and they don't. So you're betting on bringing some veteran guys in from other places, or wouldn't surprise us if Cincinnati said, Chris Jenkins, I think he could actually be good, right? And that scares the bejesus out of all of us, right? But interior defensive line, it's just not deep in this draft, not at all. K-Mac at 26, I like him, but I think where you're picking, I think he's going to be gone before you pick in the second, and you can't take him at 10. Cassius Howe has him at 29. That's another name that's been linked to Cincinnati. Edge from Texas A&M. Good player, but you really want to take back-to-back edges from Texas A&M after how the last one worked out in year one? I wouldn't either. Lastly, Peter Woods. And that's a big name that lots of people have been putting with Cincinnati. Bengals, of course, love the Clemson Tigers. I forget exactly what their relationship is, but somebody on the staff has connection with Clemson. They love Clemson, right? So they're probably like, they want Peter Woods so bad. But Brugler having him at 33 kind of backs up what we've been saying here for a while, right? Probably going to be a fine player. Wouldn't surprise me if he wasn't. Clearly not a top 10 guy. Right? Don't even consider it at number 10 overall at this point. But I wanted to roll through those guys. I think it's interesting. I think people forget because you see these mocks and Caleb's going like 10, 11, 12, 9, 10, 11, 12. This dude's one of the best players in the draft. And if I'm a GM, clearly I'm not. I'm sitting here talking to you guys. But if I was and I didn't, have a guy that necessarily I love that fit my position perfectly, I'm just going to take the best guy, right? And Caleb Downs, you could argue, could be taken at 3, right? I think that's a legitimate argument. He's that good. But fingers crossed that he falls, and obviously fingers crossed as well that Cincinnati would select him if he's there and if he is available. Real quickly here, James Pierce Jr. Had a great year on the football field. Was a finalist for the Defensive Rookie of the Year, which, by the way, a couple of different finalists that Cincinnati could have selected. They opted not to. But some crazy stuff came out about James Pierce Jr. I'm not going to fully dive into the specifics, but incident with a girlfriend, chasing her down in his car, purposely wrecking into her car, and then the police showed up, and then he freaked out and ran from the police. Then he wrecked his car, and then still resisted arrest. Like, just boneheaded stuff from James Pierce Jr. And there were red flags in the draft. That is why he fell. I think he fell all the way to 26. And if you remember back to last year's draft, there was a lot of dialogue around some of the character issues with him. And I think a lot of people thought that, if you're just going purely football, probably a top 10, top 15 pick. But he slid to the end of the first round. Falcons feel like they get a steal. Plays great on the field, and now they have a mess here that they have to deal with. Question becomes, if you're Atlanta, what do you do? Look, I don't know. All that is horrible, right? And if this was my team, I probably would cut him right there. He's going to get an opportunity to play in the NFL elsewhere. This isn't going to end his career. You can disagree with that. I think part of me kind of does, right? Like, if you're that big of an idiot, do you really deserve to be playing football? But, they care about guys that can go on the field and produce for them. So he's going to have another opportunity. Maybe it's in Atlanta. Maybe it's not. I don't know. But now all of a sudden that pick for the Falcons looks pretty bad. And if you're the Cincinnati Bengals, right, if you're some of these other teams, right, if you're personnel people on these other teams and your owner was banging you at the draft last year, like, how in the world could you not take him? This dude's a dog. You're hitting him up a couple days ago when this news broke about it. That's why, right there. Yep, we didn't want to deal with that. And, did the Cincinnati Bengals factor that into their decision when they took Shamar Stewart? I don't know. Maybe you got to give him the benefit of the doubt here. But, again, this wasn't a situation where, besides James Pierce Jr., Shamar Stewart was the best option. No. There's about 5, 6, 7, 8 guys that were better options. Probably more than that when you look at a production perspective as a rookie. Probably actually a laundry list of guys. But, credit to Cincinnati, right? Maybe they did their research. Maybe they said, yep, we're not risking it on this guy. And that, I guess, paid off. So maybe not. Maybe they just love Shamar Stewart and they're like, we don't want James Pierce Jr. But I guess you got to give him some credit for passing on him, because that was the red flags were there, and ultimately he was acting like an idiot over the weekend, whenever that was. Also, when you look at how they got him, the Falcons, what they've done recently is just stupidity. And that's why some of these teams that are just losing teams are probably going to stay that way. Right, I think the Panthers, right? Or, excuse me, not the Panthers. They actually went to the playoffs. Like the Browns, the Jets, teams like that, the Cardinals, right? You don't really see them getting it turned around. They just have losing tendencies. And the Falcons, of course, have won more games than that. But you look at what they've done in the draft, taking Michael Penix at 8 overall, a guy with, now, his red flags were not character concerns. They were medical, right? And they continued to, I guess, it was right after they got Cousins, too, and they're like, sure, we'll draft this guy that's been hurt his whole career, 8 overall, and he's going to get an opportunity, I would think, to start again, but I don't know if he's your guy of the future. But this pick also with James Pierce Jr., remember what they did. They picked Jalen Walker at 15 overall, and then they didn't have another first-round pick, because obviously you only have one first-round pick unless you make some moves. And they called up the Los Angeles Rams, and they said, we want to trade back into the first round and get another first-round pick. They did that and traded to 26 overall, right? Again, I am not a GM. I'm not qualified to have these conversations. One thing I know, you don't want to trade into the first round if you're trading into the back end of the first round. Nobody has success doing that, right? You want to trade in the first round to get a top 15 pick? Sure. But trade into the first round to get the 26th pick? What in the world are you doing, right? And now the Rams, who just went to the NFC Championship and outplayed the Seahawks in that game but still lost, are in a position where they have the 13th overall pick because the Atlanta Falcons gave up their first-round pick this year to go get James Pierce Jr. Again, losing organizations do dumb stuff like that. They were probably saw the football, what the tape said with James Pierce. They're like, heck yeah, we'll trade up and get him, roll the dice here from a character perspective. Didn't bite him during the year. Now this happens in the offseason, and we'll see exactly where they go from here. But did want to bring that up on today's show. Got to give some credit for Cincinnati, I guess, for passing on them. That'll do it for this edition of the show. Appreciate everyone, as always, for tapping in. Again, leave us a 5-star review wherever you get your podcasts at. And we'll have some clips that go up on YouTube later on as well. Be on the lookout on our social media pages when exactly we will be live tomorrow. We don't have that information yet at this point, but we will relay it with you in the morning, so be on the lookout for that. Appreciate everyone as always, and until tomorrow, take care, everybody.